All right, everybody, we got another very special guest for you this week. I want everybody to welcome to the show Jackson Lanzing.
Hey, what's up,
man? Hey, thanks for being here. After we talked about all the cool fandom stuff you have behind you, we're glad to have you here. I'm super glad about the DC stuff you're doing. You know, killing Bruce Wayne and making everybody wonder why and what you're going to do with Batman Beyond.
Awesome.
But before we get into all the cool stuff you're doing, let's hear the origin story for you. I mean, you're doing a lot of stuff. You're working with Marvel, you're working with DC. Now you got something coming with Vault Comics. So where did it all kind of start for you as far as, you knew you were going to be writing comics?
Yeah. So I read comics my whole childhood. It was actually one of the ways that I bonded with my parents. My mom was a big Neil Gaiman nerd, so she had like the Sandman books as they were coming out. Books of Magic and Sandman were like kind of showing up on our bookshelves at home. We didn't have a lot of money. I grew up pretty poor, but my mom could like buy comics. That was like the one thing she let herself do. So she would pull, it would slowly get up there, and probably earlier than I should have, I started reading through them because I was like, something about the young kid magician who was being hidden from everybody else. I don't know. It felt really iconic. And then when Harry Potter happened, everybody would get on the same wavelength.
Yeah, it was typical. Yeah.
But on Books of Magic, I was like, this is, that was my thing. And so I got really into that. And I got really into Sandman like very early. And then that got me into Neil Gaiman. And then really, I was just a giant Neil Gaiman nerd throughout most of my young adulthood. But I didn't read a lot of other comics. I read some superhero books when I was a kid. I read some Superman. I read some Spider-Man. But Death of Superman and Clone Saga both kind of chased me off of superhero books. I think I wasn't invested in Ben Reilly. Now I really like Ben Reilly, but like at the time as a kid, I was like, "Where's my Peter Parker?" So
yeah, right. No.
I kind of chased off. And in high school, X-Men 2 came out. I'm sort of setting myself in you can age.
Yeah. Yeah.
But X-Men 2 came out in high school. And I vividly remember my buddy Jared Jared was like the drummer in a band I was in. Jared was so psyched about the Phoenix at the end. He was like, "Oh my God, the Phoenix." And I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is. Yeah. I should know more about comics. That sounds like a fun thing to do. I'd let it go for so long. Maybe I want to get back into this. Cause after all, I'd read all these like Vertigo books, but I hadn't really read anything in the core universes. So I went to New England Comics. I was living in Boston at the time. And I went to I moved around a lot as a kid. I was born in Santa Cruz. I lived in Denver. I lived in Chicago. And then I lived in Boston. And I went to New England Comics and I said, "Hey, if I wanted to get into X-Men, what should I get into?" And they pointed me at the wall and they said, "Well, Chris Claremont just came back and is doing an X-Men run on X-Men. So if you want like old school X-Men, that's kind of what you're looking for. And then Joss Whedon just started a run on Astonishing X-Men. So if you want to check that out, that's going there too." And I basically took those two books, devoured them, immediately became a John Cassaday fan to a terminal degree. And
as one does.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I started organizing my school schedule so that I was at a public school, but we had like free periods, right? And so if you organized it right, you could get out of school at like noon on certain days. And then I just had the whole day. If I could sneak off campus, I had the whole day. So me and my buddy Dan, we would sneak off campus sometimes and we'd go and get dinner and just like hang out. And I started reading comics at the same time. If Dan couldn't be there, I would just go and I would get a comic from New England Comics. I would go to there was like a sandwich shop down the street and I would read a book. And I just became ravenous. I was working at Starbucks at the time to make any kind of money that I could spend on myself. And because it wasn't like we had like an allowance situation, right? So I was just working and then I was converting that paycheck into comic books. And I was doing that every week to basically get up to speed on Batman. I fell in love with like Loeb sale Batman stuff. I fell in love with obviously with the X-Men in general and got pretty deep into that lore. That got me into Warren Ellis, which obviously now is a very complicated scenario, which is a bummer, but like I do that on my own. Like he got like Transmetropolitan especially really got me into comics in a way that I would never get out. Preacher was the same way. Just books that really grabbed me and kept me there. And pretty soon it was like, oh, well, I just have to fill shelves. And now I have, shelves of comics everywhere in my house.
Yeah.
And that became kind of just like a fandom. And I think by the time that I got to college, I went to USC for film school. So I wanted to be a film director. But I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew I loved movies. I grew up on movies and comics and I wanted to do that. And so by the time I got to college, I was like, maybe I want to write a comic. Like maybe that'd be fun. I love comic books. I'm reading them all the time. It's kind of a different medium. Maybe I'll, mess around. and I wrote my first sort of spec comic, just thing called Proletariat, that someday I will do. Someday, in like 30 years, Proletariat will be a thing. But until then, it's a thing I wrote in college. And I wrote it, and I was on a movie set, like a student film set, little like 20-person crew. It was my first set. I was really excited. And I walked past the sound engineer, and I was like the assistant cameraman. And I walked past the sound engineer, and he was talking to somebody about the Ultimates. And I just heard the word Ultimates. And I turned and I went, Ultimates? And he was like, Ultimates. And it was like immediate friendship. And this guy, David Server, he and I went out to lunch the next day. And he was like, I have this idea for a comic, but I don't really know what I want to do with it. Here's all of my ideas. Here's some of the designs that I've already got people doing. Like, I don't really know what it is. And I said, well, here's what I'd do. And I mean, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours later, we'd come up with this whole book. And he was like, do you want to write this with me? And I was like, I guess. I've never written with anybody before. Like, sure. And that 4 years later, after film school, after all that, we, rather than putting my money into making like a student film, because I never had enough money to do that. I was still working at Starbucks, to like pay my way. But I could pay for it with a comic. Yeah, it's a much less class limited medium, and so I was like, all right, let's do it. Created our first book, which is called Freak Show. Ape Entertainment published it. The publisher's long gone at this point, I think, but they published it. We were with Joe Suter. We pitched that around in San Diego in like 2009. We graduated college in 2008, and then we had the book published in 2011. We had a bunch of very lucky things that came out of that. We met Derek Robertson, the artist on Transmet, who I've been just a nerd about as a fan. He happened to need representation, and David had not really wanted to be a writer long term. He wanted to be a rep. He wanted to manage and help other writers and artists kick butt. Derek needed a rep and happened to have a meeting with David, and David brought me, and all of a sudden I'm friends with Derek Robertson. And Derek's like, hey, do you want to, you want me to draw your cover? I'll draw your cover for free. And Derek Robertson drew the cover to my very first comic for free.
Wow.
Because that's the kind of guy he is. And just unbelievable thing.
Amazing. Yeah.
And so that sort of taught me how friendly comics can be, how much of a community it can be. I started to meet the people who were making comics at the time. We put out our 3 issues. And then I didn't really get work for like 3 years after that, right? Because it was an independent comic. Who knows if anybody read it, whatever's happening. David stopped writing. I started writing with his roommate at the time, weirdly enough, who became my best friend. And he and I just became super, super bonded. A guy named Colin Kelly. Okay. Colin and I had been hanging out since we were 18. If you hear this from Colin's side, I'm the dude who rolled in and stole his best friend, and he totally hated me for years, but then we figured out that we were partners. Okay. And we had started writing together on a road trip and realized that we'd been pretty good. We'd been picked up by WME, this agency of screenwriters, and we'd just been kind of doing the young Hollywood hustle, had no idea what we were doing. And right. Rebecca Taylor, who was an editor at she was an intern at Archaea, and then she became an editor at Archaea, and then eventually an editor at Boom. Okay. She had seen our pitch way back. And 3 years later, calls me up. We'd had a couple of dinners just as friends. She calls me up and says, hey, I'm writing, I'm doing this book with Alyssa Milano. Tried to figure it out. Would you be interested in ghostwriting? And I said, no, not really interested in ghostwriting, but I'd be interested in writing it if she wants to write it. If she wants us to write it and work with her, I'm happy to have a meeting. And they were like, all right, we'll send a sample. I was I'm working with this guy, Colin. We sent our screenplay sample. That sent to Alyssa. Alyssa liked it. Rebecca liked it. That all went back to us. We all took a meeting. And out of that meeting, we came home and got a call that we had the job on this thing called Hacktivist. That would eventually be called Hacktivist that's what we called it. But Hacktivist was the first book that we did for a real publisher, for a big publisher. It was just after Archaea got merged up with Boom. Boom bought Archaea and incorporated that whole catalog. And so suddenly we had a Boom book with Marcus Toe drawing, which was
that's awesome.
Amazing to us. Right, we became close friends with Marcus. He became our brother. And then suddenly we have a chance to pitch our own original thing. Out of that comes Joyride, which was our first create our own book and the first thing that really sold for us. We did 3 trades of that, 12 issues at Boom. Of this punk rock teenage Star Trek book with Marcus that was just so freeing and awesome. And during that period, Rebecca Taylor, that same person to whom I owe my whole career, goes over and moves to DC Comics. And just at the point at which they are launching Batman and Robin Eternal with James Tynion, who's also become a friend of mine through Boom. I literally remember Baltimore Comic-Con, 6 years ago, James Tynan turns to me. We're signing next to each other. He's signing The Woods. I'm signing Hacktivist. And he's like, would you ever want to do superhero comics? Is that something you're interested in? And I was like, I mean, I'd love to, but why would anybody ever let me do that? Like, it's probably not our scene. And then lo and behold, like 3 years later, I'm working for James on Batman and Robin Eternal in our first DC room. And it's us and Scott Snyder and Steve Orlando and Genevieve Valentine and Ed Brisson. It's an incredible room. And Tim Seeley. And like like, and that was really like the point at which you're like, I guess this is real. And truthfully, I think we've just been hanging on to the side of the ship ever since. Like, it's been like, someday they're going to, it's that imposter syndrome thing of like, someday they're going to realize that we're here. But until then, we're like kind of clacked on. And then this year, I think of all years, was really the one that finally like, we've settled into it enough that I'm not worried that there's not, that there's not going to be a book on the shelves. Like we've really, I think now we've hit a point where we've hit a stride, at least for a little bit, and are able to just comfortably start telling stories in comics, which is, I mean, the dream.
That's awesome.
And we're doing film and TV stuff in the background of all of that, but honestly, comics has become the main gig. It's become the thing we spend most of our time on. Colin and I write together every Thursday night and every Sunday all day. I'm literally going there after this. And otherwise, we still hold down day jobs because we don't know how to not, work, I guess.
Yeah, great.
We've just kept going, and that's how
that's amazing.
We began.
So, I would like to start you where I first heard your name, and that's on Batman Beyond. So, I guess my first question is: were you always a Beyond fan? Like, did you watch it when you were younger, like myself and Mike?
So yeah, so it's funny. Yes and no, and that's because I have my mom had a rule when I was growing up. I had like a rule in my house, which was that because my mom's kind of a hippie and a druid and like a pacifist. Her whole thing was like I was not allowed to watch cartoons where people beat up other people. That was like a rule in my house. So I was allowed to watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they were animals. It was the only way around that rule. But Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, X-Men, I didn't encounter any of that stuff until I got to college. So what happened was Batman Beyond was one of the first shows that David, the guy I wrote Freak Show with, showed me. He and I sat down with Colin and we all watched Batman Beyond together. And that was my first encounter with Batman Beyond. And then I basically became an immediate fan. I was like, this is my whole thing because I love cyberpunk. I grew up on Neil Stephenson and I was allowed to read books. So I read a lot of Neil Stephenson. I read a lot of William Gibson. I read a lot of the influences on Batman Beyond well before I watched Batman Beyond. And I was a Batman fan. I was a cyberpunk fan. And then when Batman Beyond came along, it was like, well, this is all my favorite stuff. But I got to it a little bit later and then I've been a fan, ever since.
Yeah, because reading your story in Urban Legends, I was like, this guy knows Beyond because there's so many little Easter eggs throughout it and little like notes. I'm like, yeah, he's watched it. Like he knows because I just watched it, reading it, going like, yeah, that's from the show.
Yeah, right.
We watch a lot of that, and also Colin is a lifelong fan of this. The cool thing here is that while Colin and I are really similar, and that's why we work so well together, he also has like his own origin, and part of that involves a deep love of Batman Beyond and of the DC animated shows in general.
So yeah,
I just want to say when this miniseries was brought up, whether it was them coming to you or you going to them, was there any conversation of continuing the continuity that like Dan Jurgens and them had done? Because it seems like you guys are kind of starting fresh.
Yes. So that was obviously like the first conversation. Before you go any further, you're like, how much are we building on what's come before? Right. And obviously, enormous respect for Dan Jurgens. I grew up reading Superman work by Dan. I have enormous respect for him. Enormous respect for Kyle Higgins, who's a friend of mine. Like we go to each other's houses for dinner. Like I have a lot of love for these stories, and I read them as they were coming out. My instinct on Batman Beyond, Colin and I sort of collective instinct on Batman Beyond, is that what we want to do is do a book that is open to anybody who's watched the series and has never picked up a comic. And a large part of that is because like, you kind of limit your readership the minute you're like, okay, cool. So you have to read these 7 trades to understand what's going on.
Right.
But also because those stories, I think, basically stretched the limits of what you could do with Batman Beyond without actually shaking it up and doing something new. And that was where we came in. So they came to us with Dave Wheelghost came to us with do 30 pages of Batman Beyond. That was all we had. We didn't have a miniseries. We had 30 pages. In Batman Urban Legends, they were like, I love Dave. He's been he's been on every book we've ever done at DC, basically, with I think the exception of Genlock. And he was like, I really want to do Batman Beyond with you guys. What do you got? And Colin and I went away and we're like, if we're going to do 30 pages and we really want to make them count, and we want to do something interesting, what would really shaking up Terry's life look like? What would it be to really just like throw a meteor at Terry that could actually change his world and force him into some new scenarios and some new problems? Because he's faced every Beyond version of one of Batman's heroes or Batman's villains. He's faced every comic book version of his core villains. So either you have to start creating new villains in the same pantheon and same sort of vibe that you've done with all Batman Beyond stuff, and it'll just continue on being Batman Beyond, which is fine and cool and great, and I read it. But it's not really my vibe. Colin and I, if we're going to come in, we're going to try to do something new and shake it up and make it interesting for ourselves. So in looking at what kind of Batman Beyond story we'd want to read, we kept going back to something that we felt Terry had never got, which was a year one. Not a year one like his first time being Batman, but a year one like Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's year one, where Batman only exists because Bruce forces it to exist. Because Bruce has this obsession, he has this intensity, he's going to learn and he's going to do it. And I think that's really salient, and it sort of shows what it means to be Batman. That Batman isn't, as much as it's a family and as much as all that, when it starts, it's not a group effort. It's one man carving this legend out of nothing, which is such a great pulp thing and such a great Batman thing. And Terry hasn't had to do that. He's never had to do that. Because he's had Bruce over his shoulder teaching him what that means. So we thought, well, okay, it's not like Dan didn't kill Bruce. He did for a little bit, right? It's not like it's a totally new thing to be like, we're going to kill Bruce Wayne. But our version of it was to say, not only are we going to kill Bruce, but we're going to keep him dead. We're not going to promise any kind of resurrection. We're going to make the point that by removing Bruce from the equation, Terry really has to understand what it means to be Batman for himself. And let's see what that is. And in that 30 pages, we tell the story of him facing down Bruce's murderer, and I don't want to tell more about, without spoiling things, but faces down Bruce's murderer and shows mercy and shows that is what it means to be Batman. That no killing rule is not just about bringing things to justice. It's about understanding that everyone has these broken sides to them and everybody has these chances for redemption, that anybody can become Batman, if they are able to come to grips with their own psychosis in their own way, whatever that is. And we turned that in, and Dave hit us up and he was like, so first off, I just want to say thank you so much for this. And also thank you for the additional 6 issues you're about to write of this. And we were like, oh, amazing. What? And he was like, yeah, amazing. This can't be the end. You got to go now. And so that's where Neo Year came from. Neo Year as a miniseries was us looking at what we'd done in that 30 and saying, great. All right. Now we promised Terry McGinnis year one. What does that really look like? What does it mean for Terry to not have the cave and not have the gadgets and not have Bruce and not have Ace and not what does it mean when we strip back a lot of what you think of as Batman Beyond and just focus on Neo Gotham and on Terry and start building a new world for him around that he has to carve.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So no disrespect to anything that came before. We're going to try to own it in continuity as much as we can, but we really tried to blank slate it and make this a new era that sits on its own.
Yeah, I loved it, and putting my fan hat on, because as you said, they did the same thing with Higgins, where they kind of just said, we'll just start over again.
Right.
They keep getting to this point where we're going to do Justice League Beyond, and I'm like, oh yeah, Justice League Beyond, let's do it, and then it's like, let's restart. So as a fan, I'm like, can we just do Justice League Beyond? But then I read your 30 pages or whatever it was, and I'm like, this is awesome, I'm down for this. As long as it's Beyond that's good, I'm in.
I can tell you, man, if for no other reason than Max Dunbar's version of Neo Gotham, this book is gonna just blow minds. We got this page from him for issue 2 that I know just passed around the DC editorial office because it was like a Where's Waldo of cool shit. Max. I've wanted to work with Max Dunbar for a long time. I've been a fan of his for ages. He is doing work beyond what I thought he was capable of. No pun intended.
Yeah. Beyond. Beyond. Dude, I think that's so awesome to take it in a direction. Like a lot of the times you see a story get taken in a direction, it's like, oh, someone's taking up the mantle that's not Terry or something like that. But
Right.
this puts him at like you said, year one, where he's got to keep it going for himself.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
We're really excited about it. I think that the challenge of that obviously is that it does leave behind characters that people love. It leaves behind his family. It leaves behind Bruce. It leaves behind Dana.
Right.
There are less nostalgia triggers to push, and it becomes a lot more about how do you tell new stories and build new stuff. So I'm really excited to see what fans think and how they sort of embrace it. Because I mean, we're introducing new villains, new heroes, new side characters. We're really, whenever we can avoid using something old, we are. And that's a challenge on a thing that has so much love like Batman Beyond. So I'm excited. I'm excited and a little nervous for people to see what we're doing. But I think if you enter it with an open mind and the idea that this is sort of Terry year one, it should, I think, allow for people to enjoy something new in Neo Gotham.
That's really cool. Let's switch gears a little bit to another publisher, because I mean I could sit here and talk about DC all day because I'm a huge DC fan, but we're also a huge fan of Vault Comics, and I know you just finished up a Kickstarter for Wolf. And I think I just finished yesterday, right? So talk about that, and Vault just picked it up. We just saw the news for that. So
Wolf is a really just singular project that I'm still kind of. I was saying this morning to my wife, like I've been kind of dazed all day, and I think it's because the Kickstarter ended yesterday, and I'm still in disbelief. Right. So 5 years ago or so, back in like the Joyride days, Colin and I met this artist named Dalen Ogden, who goes to a lot of conventions and does a lot of art that features like wolves and witches and old woods, but has this beautiful sort of Art Nouveau inspired style. And wasn't doing a lot of sequentials, but was really interested in doing sequentials. And we were at the time sort of looking at a bunch of different artists to do like short stories. And we were building a short with Dalen, and then that turned into a much larger thing. And by the time it was done, sort of planning, and once we'd written the script and built it all out, which was a few years back, it was this 44-page horror comic. It was like what if Robert Eggers, like of like The Witch and The Lighthouse, directed Princess Mononoke. It was like this very like folk horror take on werewolves as a female empowerment metaphor, and it dealt with like domestic abuse, which is something that's touched a lot of our lives. And so we really thought, hey, this is a thing that we can do really honestly and do in a very like creator-owned way. But it's also just like a 44-page book. It's not a full graphic novel. It's not a series. It has no intention of being ongoing. So what is this? Like, where's the place to take this? How do you make this thing other than just to make it and bring it to conventions or whatever? And we'd been waiting, and Dalen had done some other sequential work, and it kind of warmed up. They were always a little concerned that they weren't ready. And then all of a sudden, during pandemic, Dalen was ready and started drawing pages. And we started getting pages every couple of days, and they were incredible, like beyond anything we could have expected. And they were getting better and better and better. And they even went back and redrew the first few pages that we'd initially lettered as like pitch materials, and just went above and beyond what we could have expected. And so we got to the beginning of this year, and we're looking at it. We're like, we think we actually have a book here. So something that's really ready and something that's worth people's money and time. Who would publish it, though? And we were like, well, the only people in the world who would publish this are Vault, and they would have to break their model to do it, because Vault really doesn't do a lot of one-shots, and they certainly don't do like these oversized things with art book pages, and like this would be a lift for Vault if they were going to do it. And I know the guys at Vault. I did ZojaCon at Vault. I did Dark One at Vault. I'm doing a sequel to Dark One at Vault right now. Like, Colin and I have been working with Damien and Adrian there for years and years and years. And I have them on my cell phone. I know these guys well. So I know if we want to push them, maybe they'll do it. But I'd rather us have this be something that we can control and we know and we love. And then if it's worth their time once we've done the Kickstarter, maybe we fund the Kickstarter, at the last minute, then maybe we can get them involved. So we said, okay, we're going to kickstart it. And Dalen was the one who was like, we're going to kickstart it. Because we've never kickstarted a comic before. I've been very reluctant to do so. I wasn't sure if people would really show up. And I always feel uncomfortable asking people for money. And then when we put it up, with the help of Jaslyn Stone, who I really do think helped us make this whole thing happen, an amazing Kickstarter manager who's worked on a bunch of projects like True Cult, and it's just great. And Jaslyn helped us get our shit together, and we put that up, and we funded in 9 hours.
That's crazy.
We funded $20K in 9 hours, which $20K is a lot for a comic, and it was all of that was to get Dalen paid. Colin and I didn't take a cent on that. Our payment as creators came as a stretch goal that we didn't even announce. It was just like in there as a stretch goal if people wanted to get us there, but it was just about getting Dalen paid because they'd done all this work and getting the book financed. And it happened in 9 hours. And we were like, oh, okay, wow. I guess we have something here. And then the reaction to it was so far beyond what I could have expected that by the time we closed the Kickstarter yesterday and we were over 250% funded, we raised over $50,000 on a book that costs less than $20,000 to produce. We just couldn't really believe our eyes. Like, we still are all in shock. And about a week into the Kickstarter, after that first fund, we started conversations with Vault because we said, this is the time. They came to us, we came to them. I mean, we were really mutually thinking of each other. They were like, do you need any help? And we were like, well, we need you. And that deal came together extraordinarily quickly. And we were able to announce halfway through the campaign, which was amazing. And we have this amazing support system for our printing and our fulfillment, which I sort of thought we'd be fulfilling a few books, and now we're fulfilling more than 1,000 copies of this book just on the Kickstarter alone. So it's like, all right, if we're gonna fulfill that, and then we're gonna be able to take this book to retail and have a retail version that everybody can see, regardless of whether or not they back the Kickstarter. That's amazing. Wonderful for us. Like that's the best possible scenario because it launches Dalen, which was really the whole point of this book, was to launch Dalen Ogden into the stratosphere. And this was our great way of being like, look, here's what Dalen does. Check them out in the best case, possible way. Back it if you want. And if you miss this, it'll be all over your comic stores at the end of 2022. So, we'll have 2 shots at that. So we're just so thrilled and happy and grateful to Vault, and especially to the pack of what we call the Whiff Wolf pack, right? The people who came out of the woodwork to support this book and back it and make sure that it came to life. So it's been a I'm not a religious guy. It's been a very religious experience for me seeing this community come together around this.
Yeah. And as you said, it's not typical of Vault to release, this will be almost like a giant sized issue just from them, right? Not like a trade, but a little bigger than a normal size issue. So
yeah.
I think
we call it a graphic novella, which I'm pretty sure we're making up, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
That's a great term for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I'm going to steal that term.
yeah, it's good.
That's amazing. You had me with the Robert Eggers. The Witch is probably my favorite horror movie. Ever seeing that, but
he's the best, man. Yeah, he's the best.
Yeah, so I'm definitely checking it out when Vault and 2022, right?
Yeah, we're looking to fulfill the Kickstarter in October of 2022, and my guess is it'll solicit to stores for November or December of 2022.
Awesome, great, excited for that.
We're really excited.
Jack, because you're not satisfied working for 2 publishers, you got to work for all of them. Let's talk about Marvel.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Kang. How is it doing Kang, especially after the big Loki reveal and it being a big deal?
A complete dream come true. I mean, Kang is Kang is one of those things I'm still pinching myself that it happens. I have next to me just because I came back from my store the other day and I didn't have this yet. There's this Young Avengers variant that even Coelho did for issue 1, and Colin and I, when we met, right, when we used to have to pile into our buddy Dave's car, and because neither of us had a car in college, we both piled into our buddy Dave's car. We lived in LA, so you need one, and we would drive to our local comic stop to Golden Apple, and we would pick up our comics, and we would go and read our comics and argue about them over pizza. And the book that we were all reading at the time was Young Avengers, like that early the Chung run on the book, that first phase. That was the Alan Heinberg bit. That was our like favorite thing at the time. We were all getting super into it, and it introduced all of us to Kang the Conqueror. Like we knew Kang, I think, like esoterically, but especially me, I'd only gotten into comics in high school, so my exposure to Kang the Conqueror was very low, and I fell in love with him through Iron Lad, and just thought it was such an amazing story to look at this character who genuinely wants to be a good person, but knows that no matter what he does, he is going to become Kang the Conqueror.
Right.
And there's no escape, no matter how much he tells himself he's a good person. And I was like, that's very relatable. I really dig that. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a horrible person. But I was like, I think there's something really beautiful about that and really poignant about that. And I've always loved it. And Colin and I were in the middle of pandemic, and it was actually before pandemic. It was like late 2019, early 2020. We'd been invited to pitch at Marvel, and we pitched a couple of things that were kind of half baked, to be honest. Like we pitched, like we were really trying to stay out of everybody's way. So we were just sort of being like, I don't know, this character that nobody's using, maybe this. I don't know, this character nobody's using, maybe this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going anywhere. And I honestly owe Donnie Cates a public thank you for this, because I went out to barbecue with Donnie while we were in Austin once, and I was like, I can't land anything. We're good soldiers, and then nothing happens. And he was like, well, nobody wants good soldiers. Everybody needs generals. Be a general.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And so I went back, and I was like, well, Colin and I had this pitch that we were talking about that was sort of a sequel to a book we'd done at Vault called Zojacon, that was about our moms and about like what it means to be a mother and try to raise a kid with, in all of the complexity that especially raising a son introduces to a single mother. And we were like, we want to write something about our dads, which is a lot more complicated because there's a lot of stuff tied up in that. Especially, I have a bad relationship with my dad. So it was really a process of trying to figure out, like, how do we turn this into something that we can talk about? And we were building this thing about time loops and abuse, and about what abuse does in time loops. And I think Colin said, like, what would be really cool, what would be absolutely perfect for this, is if this was a Kang the Conqueror book. Like, this would be fine as a creator-owned, but, like, this is so much better if it's Kang. And we were like, yeah, it is, but, like, who's going to publish a Kang the Conqueror? Like, Marvel's never going to do that. But, like, all right. So we wrote up this whole pitch, and we sent it to Alana, this is ready to go. Sent it to Alana Smith, our editor, who was the one who invited us in. And we sent it to her, and she sent us back a thing being like, I mean, this is beautiful. This is great. I love this. But, like, who's going to publish a Kang the Conqueror comic? We were like, yeah, we agree. Right. We sort of assumed that was the case.
Right.
And then he got cast in the MCU. And I saw the Jonathan Majors casting, and because we were in quarantine and I had nothing better to do. And then the thing comes in, and I just sent that and the pitch back to Lana, and I was like, is Kang the Conqueror on anybody's radar now? And we had to go book. And from
That's
there,
amazing.
We had our first Marvel book, and it was a book that we'd come up with as a very personal sort of creator-owned thing. And now here we are working with like our heroes, like Tom Brevoort on this thing. Like, Kieran Gillen's reading my scripts. Like, people are.
That's amazing.
Mike Del Mundo's drawing our covers, and Carlos Mario is like doing the work of his career. Like, that book is so far beyond what I could have ever expected it to be. And then for people to have embraced it, and the fact that it like sold, like, it means so much to us. We can't believe it's happening. It's just insane to me.
That's awesome.
Truthfully.
Yeah.
And
stuff.
It's funny because we had Brevoort on the show. I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, and we had brought up the thing of like, oh, Kang's popular now. We got the Kang book, and he's like, well, you'd be stupid not to release these characters around the time of like when they're popular. It's like, yeah, it's just as far as running a business goes, like, okay, that makes sense too. But
it makes the most sense. The fun part is that we had no idea he was going to be on Loki.
Oh yeah.
So,
okay. Right.
So they put our book in July, and I didn't realize the reason for that in part was because this was going to drop right before then, right? Like, this was going to drop, and then and like Loki was going to drop, and then our book was going to follow it. And I was like, I genuinely didn't understand that was happening. And meanwhile, I'm watching Loki as a fan, being like, "Oh my god, is it Kang?" Like I'm literally the whole time. I'm like,
right.
Oh,
yeah.
And so my wife and I we're heading home to her parents' house, which is out in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, for our like a vacation, and we happened to be flying the night of the Loki finale. So I realized if I don't watch it before I get on social media, other people will be hitting me. If it is Kang, other people will be hitting me up, being like,
"You got to know,
So we literally watched it on the tarmac on my cell phone. Like the minute we touched down, her and I, just so we could be like, "Whew, okay."
It is Kang, and that's amazing.
And immediately it was wild because immediately I was like, "This is my favorite version of Immortus I've ever seen." If we ever, because Immortus is not really part of our Kang series, but it was like, if we ever do an Immortus thing, it's got it. I want to write him exactly like Jonathan Majors plays him. Like what a great performance! Like so cool.
And like I think the like casualness about like time and like how we know that he's a big and powerful character, but like to him, it's like he can't change it, even with all that power. So it's like it's such an interesting character to have, and it's got to be so much fun to write.
It's so fun and tragically futile. I mean, I think that's to your point. There's a resignation to Kang, and so our whole, and certainly to Immortus, I think that was our thing with doing Kang the Conqueror in our series was he's not really Kang until the end, right? It's kind of an origin,
right?
And it's really about following Nathan. Call him Nathan. Following Nate or Nathaniel, right? Following Nate through that process of embracing that identity and what that means after years and years and years of being like, I'll never do it, I'll never do it, I'll never do it. Of Iron Lad in various forms showing up and being like, well, I'm the good Kang. It's like, great, well, let's see how you eventually become the not good Kang. What does that really mean? To get beyond that. And then like that's also just a cool opportunity to write a tragedy at Marvel Comics, which is not an opportunity you get a lot. I don't like we're getting to write a tragedy at any of the big two with any of the big two characters is a real swing for them. We just feel so honored and like lucky to have gotten a chance to do that as our first outing out at Marvel.
It's so awesome. Yeah.
So Jack, I know you have a hard out, but I want to get 2 more books in.
Yeah, good. I have a hard out. I'll stick around.
Okay. First, I'm gonna get a little hostile with you here because you're messing with one of my boys.
Bring it on.
So you got another Marvel book coming out.
We do.
Tie into Devil's Reign, Winter Soldier. So tell me you're gonna do Bucky right.
Wow, putting him on the spot like that. Oh my god. Okay.
Listen, I got the cap shirt on. Tell me you're doing Bucky right.
Here's what I'll tell you. Bucky Barnes is one of my very favorite characters. I've been reading him since the moment especially his adult version. I've been reading him since the moment he showed up. That Brubaker Epting run means the world to me. I have all of them in single issues. Bucky is due some reckoning, in my opinion, because and I'll just say this outright because we kind of say it outright in that issue. Bucky's forgiveness for his time as Winter Soldier happened at the point of a cosmic cube, right? And it happened through Steve Rogers. That was Steve showing up with the cosmic cube and being like, you're better now. And then he was. That's lovely. That's cool. That's fine. I don't dislike that story decision. But I do think that in the aftermath of that, it's really important for Bucky to eventually really look at what he was and what he did and understand whether or not that was him or not. Because I don't really buy this whole thing where the Winter Soldier is fundamentally a different person. I think there's got to be some of Bucky in there, and I think the MCU's done a really lovely job of trying to reconcile that, maybe even more than the comics have. So my interest here is in letting Bucky really look that in the eye and experience the pain of what that means. So all of that is to say, we're doing Bucky right insofar as we are putting Bucky through some pain. And we are going to put him into a new understanding of what his past was a little bit, and ideally launch him into some new stuff. I can't tell you what that means because there is stuff that is on the horizon. But what I can say is that this is not just like a discrete one shot. It has ramifications, and it has it's our attempt to, like we did with Terry McGinnis and Bruce Wayne. It's kind of our attempt to open up a little bit of a Pandora's box. as to allow some new story territory for Bucky as he moves forward. Because I also think he's a little trapped in just being like serious Hawkeye sometimes, and I want to make sure that he can get his own space to play. So that's a priority for me.
So you don't confirm this or deny it, unless you want to and want to make us famous.
Yeah.
But in my head now, you're doing a Bucky book after this, and
I will deny that we are doing a Bucky book.
So I hope you are, because one of my favorite moments in the Falcon and Winter Soldier comic series was like in the beginning when Bucky's kind of like off in the Mideast or Midwest, and he's like trying to figure out like how to forgive himself for those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a couple panels, and then they're like, and then an adventure happens. But I'm like, yeah, that, because you're right, we do kind of just like let Bucky off for these terrible crimes. It would be nice for him to kind of like have a little introspective and say like, I did some fucked up things. Like I should probably figure it out.
So I completely agree. I think what's interesting and what's hard about that in an action comic is you also want Bucky to go out there and like punch some people and do some stuff. Like you want a Winter Soldier book can't be 20 pages of navel gazing. Like I guess it could be, but at its best, those 20 pages of navel gazing to me are the Alesh Cott Marco Rudy run, which I know gets a lot of slack because it's so weird and it's so beyond what people think of as Winter Soldier. But honestly, it's one of my favorite books. I love it to death. We reference Ventolin in Devil's Reign. Like I'm sort of, a big part of me is like I want to bring that version of Bucky back a little bit, because I think that idea of a guy who he looked at his violent past, that whole book was him being like, I did some really fucked up stuff. Can I forgive myself and can I learn to live in peace? Right? There's that whole thing about like the lost glove is happy. And the more that Bucky is lost, the more that he is happy. The more he doesn't have a mission, and the more that he doesn't have to like go off and do anything, the more that he can start to sit in this idea of peace and like just be happy with himself, regardless of the horrible shit he's done. We're putting the glove back on. That's to use the metaphor, I think, sort of flipping that on. What we're really trying to do with Bucky, without spoiling anything, is not allow him 20 pages of navel gazing, or for whatever's coming down the pike, allow that character to like do that there. No. What we want to do is give Bucky a new mission. It's give Bucky a new target, give Bucky a new understanding of what he can do in his own life to make up for what he has done. And that's not just going to places and saying sorry. That's not going to therapy. Like all of that stuff, he's done that and he's tried that. And it hasn't really worked. So for Bucky, I think the best way for him to be reactive in like a self-positive way is to actually go out there and do what Bucky does best, which unfortunately is like beat up and kill people. So there's a little bit of like a Frank Castle thing where it's kind of he's damned if he's not, damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. And that's the stuff I'm really interested in digging into. So again, without spoiling anything, he's very much I think going to be looking for some answers, and in the answers that he does find, ideally he's really going to find a new path forward that may not look quite like the man of peace that he's been trying to become.
It's a brutal road to recovery.
It is for him. I'm not sure I'm curious where his road to recovery ends. I don't know what recovery looks like for Bucky.
Right, what does it look like?
He can never become the kid he was,
Right.
Like he's the man he is, like no matter what he's done. So I think it's about figuring out how to turn that into something proactive.
Yeah. Turning him into what Moon Knight is now.
I hope you like it. As a Bucky fan, genuinely, let me know how it hits you. The one thing, again, I can say, I just like talking up our artists, but it's true. The art on this book is insane. It is it's Nico Leon, who you might have seen in the Captain America Infinity comic that just came out that Eden did.
Yep.
He is doing work. Like we got an email at the end of the project that was like, he literally said like, I'm not normally a fan of my own work. This whole book, I've just been like, so happy with how it's turned out. Like he's clearly living on this book. Like he really reacted to our script, and you can see it in every page. I'm really excited. I haven't seen it colored yet, but I honestly, you could release the book in black and white, and it would be stellar. So I can't wait to see what
that's so cool, man.
What it looks like when it's finally out. But again, what an honor to get a chance to play with this character at all, right? Like a character I just love deeply, and now they let me have opinions about him. It blows my mind.
It's amazing.
So I guess the place to end it up is at the old Valiant Comics. What do you know with Harbinger?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's going on with Harbinger?
Harbinger.
There it is.
There he is.
Yeah.
He's got a costume now.
What's up? Now he's wearing something.
So back before we were doing anything, literally Harbinger predates Batman Beyond, Kang, Bucky, all of it.
Okay.
We had been basically we hadn't had any work at DC for a while, and we really wanted to do something superhero-y and cool, and we'd been banging on the door of Valiant for a while because I've been a lifelong Valiant fan. Specifically, I'm a lifelong Harbinger fan. Been reading it since the original books. And we Heather Antos grabbed us at New York Comic Con in 2019 and was like, "Hey guys, how about Harbinger?" We'd been pitching everything except for Harbinger. So like, well, they'll never do that with us. So why would I even pitch it? I love Josh Dysart's run so much I wouldn't know how to follow it. And they said, "What do you want to do?" And their only stipulation was, we'd really like to make it just about Peter Stanchik. We want to just like Heather is a brilliant editor, and her initial instinct was Harbinger's been a team book forever. And Peter's always been such a dirtbag. The whole point of Harbinger is like dirtbag X-Men. It's, what if the X-Men had no responsibility? And what if the only thing you had to do was be anti-corporate and run? That sort of cool grime punk political take on X-Men has always been a big thing for us. And she was like, but Peter Stanchik has done a lot of really terrible shit over the time of that. He has, he is literally like, he calls it mind rape. It's just rape. He's effectively raped his best friend. He's empowered a bunch of people and strung them into a life of crime and violence. He has had friends killed over it. He's abandoned friends over it. He's disappeared to fucking Jupiter for a while. He's done all kinds of just dumb stuff, and he has really not been a responsible person. And yet, throughout the entirety of Josh Dysart's run, people are constantly saying, Peter Stanchik's going to be a hero someday. Peter Stanchik is going to be one of the best men of all time someday. He's going to be such a great dude. And you believe it because the book is great and you want to believe it, but there's no indication that Peter is ever going to be ready for that.
Right.
And so Heather's thing was, we want to do a book about Peter. I don't know what that looks like, but we'd like to take him on to a next step. And Colin and I were like, we were right in the middle of late 2019. We were in the middle of a big conversation about reckoning with masculinity and about what it means to understand your place in abuse cycles and what it means to your responsibility as like a man, and especially as like a white man. And we were like, this is all stuff we're thinking about a lot just in our own lives because we want to be better people. And we always want to be looking at like, how do we support the people around us who don't have nearly the kind of privilege we do. And we realized that Peter Stanchik was an amazing vehicle with which to kind of do our own work. And so that became the book. It's called Be Better. It's Harbinger, but the subtitle of the first volume is Be Better. And it is about Peter waking up.
It's my slogan.
We're not, I mean, the book is about what it's about. Peter wakes up in the wreckage of a Harbinger building after the fall of Toyo Harada. It picks up directly after Josh Dysart's run. Unlike Batman Beyond, this is one where we really are taking off right where Dysart left off and trying to use. I love Josh. He's a friend. Again, like huge admirer of his. We're not going to be able to do what Josh did. We're going to do our own thing, but we're going to start right after the fall of Toyo Harada, and we're going to drive this forward. Peter wakes up in a broken down old Harbinger building, and the whole place is covered in ash. Everything in the room's been obliterated. It's all just ash. And on the ceiling, written in the ash, are two words: be better. He looks up after this. The first thing he sees when he wakes up, he gets up. He's basically naked. He grabs a Harbinger flag and wraps it around himself so he's not fully naked, and realizes he doesn't really remember who he is. He remembers his name and he knows that he has powers, but he doesn't really remember anything else. And he starts to go, and he doesn't know who's erased his mind or why. And he runs out into Chicago. He's in Chicago. It's not a city he knows. Flies out there. He's running around. The minute he shows himself to people, Suddenly there's like stand check emergency protocols initiate. Helicopters are rolling in. People are firing guns at him. Civilians are evacuating the area. And he realized, oh, like I'm like a Godzilla-sized threat to these people. And I don't know why.
Wow.
I don't know who I am or what I am and what I've done. And so he goes and he hides with a small contingent of refugee Psiots in this place called Psiot City. It's like a little district in Chicago built around, it's sort of inspired by the ruins of Cabrini Green. Well, it's effectively like old housing projects for Psiots that the Harbinger Foundation had. But now it's all been left to wreckage because Toyo Harada's gone. And Peter discovers there a community that actually needs him for protection. And so he realizes, okay, everyone thinks of me as a monster. Even most Psiots think of me as like not a great guy. But I have the power to help, and I'm not that guy anymore. Like I don't know who that guy was. I don't have his memories. So all I can do is try to be myself and be a better version of me. And he starts to develop the idea of being a superhero, of taking on the Harbinger name that has so always been sort of a villainous name to him. He's been the renegade. He's been one of the renegades. Mm-hmm. And he's going to be the Harbinger. And he's going to sort of like try to become a superhero in the sort of classic traditional vein. And of course, that is going to go pretty badly. And that's what the book is about, is that he can do that, but that's going to mean that he's going to have to put himself through the ringer with the people he hurt. He's going to have to put himself through the ringer with the people he's trying to protect and with the humans around him who can paint him as a monster. And worse of all, there is another voice in his head, and there is someone else out there called the Renegade who has very different plans. And so we're really trying to just like do the first 4 issues are a like very internal, very psychological exploration of Peter Stanchik's anxiety and his addiction and his obsession and his attempt to be a better person. And then that opens up into a wider story after issue 4. But issue 1 just dropped. Issue 2 is dropping pretty soon. I can't believe I've gotten this far without saying the art is by Robbie Rodriguez, who created Spider-Girl, or Spider-Girl, Jesus. Who created Spider-Gwen and who is doing, I think, the work of his career here. Him and Rico Renzi are just doing like street art all over these comic book pages, and we're just holding on for dear life. Like it's a remarkable, weird, crazy, awesome book, and we've been building it for 3 years. Effectively at this point, or two and a half years at this point. It was supposed to come out in 2020, and now it's finally here. So I'm really excited for people to get to see it.
Yeah, Chris couldn't stop smiling through that because we had Dice Art on the show where he kind of like talked about how does his character redeem himself from all the awful shit that he's done.
So basically, I'm a part of a Valiant Comics read along podcast. So I now have a reputation in the Valiant community as someone who's never read Valiant stuff before, and so I'm reading this all as fresh. And as soon as we hit Peter and Harbinger #1, I was like, I'm out on this guy. He's a piece of shit. He's a rapist, and I don't like him. And I don't want to. If I was reading this as a normal reader, I would have been out right there because there's no redeeming that person in my eyes.
Yep.
Which also that was a very fun conversation, but it was also bringing up some things of like I've redeemed people who killed people, like in my head. I'm
stepping away for just a second to plug in my computer. I'll be right back.
Okay. I'll write down this time.
Because that conversation is the exact conversation that I had with Colin the first time he read Harbinger #1. I was like, you got to get in on Harbinger. And then he read Harbinger #1 and he was like, I'm out on this guy. I can't do it.
Yeah. And that got to Dice Art. And Dice Art, being the lovely human he is, had a fun, very lovely conversation with me, which led to him coming on the show. So it's well known amongst some people that I have this issue with this character in this run.
I'm really interested in how the Harbinger hits you then, because it's very much I think a big part of what we're faced with is the idea that we are not, like, even as the creators, we aren't in a position to forgive Peter.
Uh-huh.
The only person who's in a position to forgive Peter are the people he hurt. And to line them up and be like, forgive Peter, would be a feat of like fictional malpractice in my
right, for sure.
The only thing that we can do is have him start that journey and essay that journey along the way, and that's the challenge of the book, and that's kind of the equally, I think that's the exciting thing about the book, and hopefully the exciting thing for readers is really trying to reckon with understanding what forgiveness means, how much forgiveness you can extend to yourself, how much forgiveness has to be extended to you by other people, and what it means to fundamentally try to be a different person. Because you hear that a lot. People like do a terrible thing, and then a couple of years later, they're like, well, I'm a different person now. And it's like, okay, are you? What does that mean?
Yeah,
so in Peter's case, we made it quite literal. He's a literal different person. And then it's like, but he's still going to have a lot of those same problems, and he's still going to have a lot of those same impulses, and having to being able to do a book that's so internal and so much about like how he learns to control that or doesn't was very interesting to me, and then something that felt like we could mine some very real territory. And that tends to be true of all of our books. Like when we're not mining something that's very real to Colin and I, it doesn't turn out great. Like there's books that I think we've done that just aren't all that great, and it's probably because we didn't spend the time to be like, how is this like us? How is it something that's like really important to our worldview or to my worldview or to his worldview? And between Kang and Batman Beyond, and to some degree what we're doing in Bucky, and certainly on the Harbinger, we've just had this really wonderful, and with Wolf, clearly, we've had this really great experience in the last couple of years of leaning really hard into that side of what we do. And the Harbinger is, I think, actually the start of that, weirdly, even though it's the last to come out, right?
Yeah, right.
We were able to learn a little bit about like becoming a lot more internal, not just writing something because it was cool or because it was like a neat idea that we had, but writing something that led from our pain or our fear or our intention or our joy, and trying to like put that on the paper, even if it's for 4-color superheroes, because that's what brings those characters to life for me. It's what always has. That's why those characters matter to me, because they teach us about how to deal with our worst stuff, and how to live through stuff that we never thought we could live through. And I hope that extends out and finds people who need that the way I did when I was younger.
Yeah, awesome.
That's a great way to end this.
Yeah, I mean, perfect. That was a perfect.
How about that?
Yeah, wow. Not scripted.
You're obviously a very thoughtful writer, and you obviously have a great partner over there with Colin, and so far so good in my end. I look forward to Batman Year One. Stuff.
Yep.
I look forward to your future Bucky Barnes book in my head, and
not a Bucky Barnes book. There's no Bucky Barnes book.
Right.
Doesn't exist. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
It's in there. It's in my head.
Okay.
And I look forward to watching you evolve further, man. So if people out there want to keep following you, where's the best place to send them?
Come over to my Twitter at Jackson Lanzing. I know Twitter's a hellscape, but I keep it up to date with the stuff that I do there. I am also on Instagram at Found in the Wild, which I've been terrible about. But in January, like my New Year's resolution is do something on Instagram, which is a terrible New Year's resolution. But honestly, I just feel like I need to get. I'm moving off of Twitter as like any place other than just like here's my books. But I might try to put some cool stuff on Insta. We'll see. But those are the places to find.
Awesome.
All right, so everybody, I'll have links to Jackson's Comixology page so you can check out the books that he's doing.
Thank you.
Down below, and make sure to go follow him on social media. So thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson.
We definitely have to do this again sometime.
Our pleasure. Yep. Yeah, I'll bring on Colin next time, and we'll make it a gab.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, awesome. Thank you.